You're listening to Curated Consciously, your all-in-one platform for navigating and nurturing your conscious living journey. Why? Because diving into environmental justice comes with heartache and a lot of damn work. We gotta do it, but as a community, we can make the load a little lighter. Every week, we're bringing you stories, insight, and wisdom from a diverse community of leaders, activists, and influencers, helping you live a more holistic lifestyle that connects your health, wellness, and love for Mama Earth. This podcast is sponsored by Cause Artists, the world's #1 platform for social impact and innovation stories around the world. If you're looking to get inspired, hit us up at causeartist.com. And of course, I'm your host, Jasmine Rain, Curator-in-Chief at Curated Consciously and social entrepreneur. You can connect with me and our community on Instagram at Curated Consciously. Now, roll your shoulders back, get comfy, put the coffee on. It is time to deep dive into some thought-evoking conversation, Curated Consciously. Is it just me, or have you also noticed that after a massive and incredible uprising to really push forward an anti-racist movement across all of North America and around the world, suddenly the conversation just seemed to end and no one had anything else to say, and the media just completely just put coronavirus back on the map as the #1 thing that we should all be concerned about, when there are so many other issues, specifically in terms of anti-oppression and anti-racism, that need to be tackled. In this episode, this was such an incredible conversation. I had two incredible social justice powerhouses. One who you're already familiar with, Justine Abigail, who I had on the show earlier in the season, and Ariel Goldberg, who are both the creators of the Wanderful Anti-Oppression Toolkit for travel and cultural creators. In this episode, they're helping define anti-oppression, anti-racism, and actually what it means to be continuously doing the work to be a more mindful traveler and also a more mindful individual. So we're diving into power dynamics in a global context. We're even talking about the manipulation in travel marketing in terms of brand imaging, power and privilege, what it means to show up in this work, and ultimately, the journey to creating this toolkit. So what started as a series of anti-racism town halls within the tourism industry through the Wanderful platform basically led to the development of this toolkit, which is an ongoing project equipping travel creators with resources to push for an equitable travel industry for people at all intersections of identity. Now, Justine and Ariel are just two incredible, incredible humans that I really look up to, and I've known for years, actually, and specifically through the travel industry, and Ariel through Wanderful. And this was the first time we actually got to chat after I guess the first time we worked together was like 5 years ago when I published my first piece on the Wanderful platform. But to give you a little bit of background, Justine Abigail is a communications and marketing strategist who has worked with nonprofits and social enterprises operating in North America, Central America, East Africa, and Southeast Asia. Her expertise lies in growing enterprises from the ground up through strategic digital marketing, compelling storytelling, and genuine community engagement through an anti-oppression lens. She currently serves as Wanderful's communications manager and is a senior advisor for Rise Travel Institute. She's also the founder and editor-in-chief of Living Hyphen, an emerging magazine that explores the experiences of those living in between cultures. And I'll link in the show notes the previous episode we did together to learn more about that incredible project. And also, for the first time on the podcast, you'll be hearing from Ariel Goldberg, a queer, multiracial writer, activist, and traveler based in Brooklyn, New York. She serves on the Wanderful team as the program and creator director for WITS, Travel Creator and Brand Summit. She also serves as the deputy digital director for Lambda Legal, the largest LGBTQ and HIV civil rights legal organization in the world. No big deal. She has worked, edited, and traveled across the globe, but most often dreams of selling everything she owns and booking a one-way ticket to Amsterdam. Who wouldn't? Now, if you're not familiar with She's Wanderful, Wanderful is a global lifestyle brand and community that helps all women travel the world by connecting them to their biggest asset, each other. And this is a community I've been involved with for about 5 years as well. And they do everything from online and offline events, a lot of growth and success building for women in the industry, especially for digital content creators, and obviously advocating for a more equitable, inclusive, and thoughtful travel industry. I highly, highly recommend that you register and become a member of the of the organization, if you are a woman identifying traveler or a travel creator, this network has been a huge part of my journey in the last 5 years, from writing content for the platform, registering for WITS twice, and then not being able to attend. So that's the Women in Travel Summit. But what's exciting but also unfortunate is that they just announced that the WITS 2021 um, event in April will actually be online. Originally, it was supposed to be in Kansas City. Actually, it's supposed to be in Kansas City last year or this year, but unfortunately, due to COVID, they've had to really pivot to bring everything online. And it's been absolutely incredible because, for people like myself who are not able to get to these incredible events, I'm able to attend online. So I highly recommend that you learn more about Wanderful at sheswanderful.com. I will have links to access the toolkit and to learn more about Wanderful in the show notes. But without further ado, let's jump into this incredibly deep and transformative episode on anti-oppression work in the travel industry. All right, I'm really excited about this chat because we have three very different cultural and racial perspectives to share here. So I'm curious, when you reflect on your own experiences as non white women identifying creators in the travel space and as avid travelers, what common trends and problematic behaviors have you observed that just sparked your need to act?
Where should we start?
I don't even know.
Well, Jasmine, I'll take this because, or I'll start it at least. Jasmine, I started off, I entered the travel space through my position or my role at Operation Groundswell, which is another nonprofit that facilitates experiential education programs abroad for youth. And one of the, I guess, very problematic behaviors that we saw in travelers was particularly in the voluntourism industry, which is probably a whole episode in and of itself for you. But just a lot of Western youth who go abroad, and particularly in this so-called quote unquote developing countries, um, and going over there to experience a new culture. That's part of their traveling and cross-cultural experience, but also to quote unquote help and to build wells or houses or some other project like that for a less fortunate, or at least perceived to be less fortunate community or country. And without really understanding the context, or yeah, a lot of the context for going there, or the power dynamics that exist in this global context, and often just going there, to do maybe 4 or 5 hours of volunteer work in the afternoon, and then in the evening just partying it up and getting very drunk, and not being conscious of their own behaviors in this other place. And that's something that I saw firsthand, and that's why I joined this organization, Operation Groundswell, because they were trying to do something different and trying to educate on a more, what is power and privilege when you go abroad and when you travel and quote unquote help other places. What does that actually mean? That's very much simplifying the work that we did at that organization. But that's something for me that took up a lot of my brain space, or something that I saw a lot on my own travels because of the industry that I was working in.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, first I have to acknowledge that I am part white, and I look very, I am white passing in a lot of scenarios, and I look very racially ambiguous. So I think that has weirdly given me access to a lot of spaces, and privy to a lot of conversations that I maybe would not have otherwise been if people had known, about my history. So that gives me a unique perspective, but I can't pretend that I've had it the hardest. I have been around the industry for quite a while at this point, and I think the most, I guess, I don't want to say inspiring, but the most motivating thing that I can share is in the time that I have been editing and working with writers from across the world, which Jazz, you know about because we worked together before. And so hearing from writers and reading story pitches and reading content was really, I mean, I don't want to say eye-opening because like I knew beforehand, but gave me a very interesting insight into the kind of stories that were being told by the vast majority of the dominant narrative within the travel creation space, the travel content creation space, and who has access to be able to share those stories and whose voices are most often prioritized. I'm not saying specifically I'm not saying at Wonderful at all. I'm saying, overall in the movement, in the industry. Um, and that is part of the work that we have taken into building out the WITS conference, which we can talk about maybe now or at some point. But just really trying to, I always feel like when I'm answering these questions, I'm not very eloquent, but hopefully you understand what I mean. Which really trying to upend the dominant cultural narrative and really trying to make sure that um, folks who are coming to this work from a position of privilege especially are more aware of how to engage with talking about folks who are not like them, and then just educate themselves and be better. I mean, Justine and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about how a big motivator behind the toolkit is education, but at the same time, and education without being shaming if you don't know the right word or anything like that, but at the same time, folks need to understand that they are responsible for educating themselves and holding themselves accountable in that way. And so we want to go into it in a way that's like understanding of people come from different places, and especially people for whom English is not their first or native language. A lot of this terminology is not necessarily baked into the language that they learn as they learn English, but that especially for folks for whom it is, it's really up to them to be doing that work, and so making sure folks have the resources to do that, but also not people are adults, and making sure that they know that it is their responsibility to do that work as well. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you guys just like uncovered like a pot of gold there. So let me just dive into that a little bit more. So what I'm hearing is that the first biggest issue is that people are just completely unconscious. They're unaware of their presence and how that can impact a destination. And that manifests in different ways by not doing the work, not educating themselves on the local culture, or being even aware of what's happening around them, especially if they're in the vast majority of like white travelers who have access to, even not even just in terms of skin color, but also thinking about passport privilege as well, and understanding that impact on a destination and in what they need to be aware of in their interactions. But on the other side, you know, there it sounds like there's also not enough resources out there for people to understand even the why. And because they're not doing the work on their own, we need to provide them with a platform that kind of breaks down what's happening in an accessible manner, and then kind of giving them, the tools to take action, not pushing them to do the work, but telling them that it's work that needs to be done so that they need to be accountable to taking action. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah,
don't have anything else to add because you hit it on the head.
and awesome. Just wanting to make sure that we're breaking this down so that our audience, our lovely and diverse audience, can all really come together to, because we do a lot of reflection after these episodes now, which is great. So whether it's on our Facebook, on our Instagram, we're constantly prompting with questions so that we can have continuous. Because that's the thing, especially with the anti-racism movement. It's like it ended and people stopped talking about it. It's like, hey, no, there's reflection that needs to be done. There's so much work that needs to be done, and that's why I was like so excited to talk to you both about this all. But two things that I really wanted to also dive into here was, one, this idea of not being conscious of your own behaviors. And I remember even as myself being in that place. I One of my like first trips to India was actually like a voluntourism trap. And I remember being in that situation and being like, instantly like, hang on, this is wrong. Why are you taking me to the Taj Mahal? I came here to like do something good. And then also having to consciously remember as a young woman being like, oh yeah, I'm not the right person to be doing this work anyways. And that is such a journey. And I loved working with OG to really help participants understand that they cannot be the white savior in all these situations. But another thing also, Ariel, is I can really resonate with this idea of being white passing as someone of mixed race who has, I've been given a lot more privilege, compared to family members in multiple situations. And that feels it honestly feels disgusting. So I'm curious, in rolling out the virtual events that you did to kind of move into building the toolkit, what are some, kind of realizations, uh, trends that you even saw with participants who were wanting to do the work that, felt stuck in their journey towards an anti-racist agenda?
Well, I'll take it really quick and then I'll turn it over to Justine because I think she has even more insight than I do in this area. But first, I think we need to shout out Charisma Shackelford, our team member, who was really the architect of those events. And Justine has spoken at them and she can speak for herself about what that experience was like. But I was definitely doing more of the background support. So I don't know that I can necessarily speak to the, event overall. But I will say that it seemed like there was not a space that folks were able to really have conversations, in particular about anti-Black racism, as like a movement, as bringing creators from different places, from different experiences together with, especially folks on the brand side. And as the U.S. in particular, but around the world, we were seeing uprisings for Black Lives Matter over the summer. Um, those conversations were happening a lot more than they ever had before, and it's things that our team has talked about all the time for many many years, trying to figure out like how to do this work in the most ethical way. But because folks were having those conversations more broadly, it really seemed like there needed to be a space to bring people together in a way that was a little more intentional rather than just like one-off conversations here and there. And so I think that's what it was really born from. But Justine, I definitely want you to add on to that because I am sure I'm missing a lot of things.
No, that's definitely it. I guess I'll just add that it definitely stems from our moving forward anti-racism town halls that happened. It was the first one in June, the second one in October. The next one is coming up in sometime in early 2021. Dates TBD. But you're right, Jasmine. You alluded to this earlier in that we want to keep making this a conversation and something that's continuous and not just a one-time moment, but an actual movement that we continue on, which is why it was a three-part series. And that's why we built out the anti-oppression toolkit. I know for me, I really wanted to create this toolkit, and you'll notice that it's called the anti-oppression toolkit as opposed to the anti-racism toolkit, because it was really important for me. We're having all these conversations about anti-racism and racial justice, and of course that's important, no question about it. But race does not exist in a vacuum. We all have varying intersections of identity. For me personally, I am a woman. I am a woman of color, and you know those, I guess, are my main intersections, where other folks are also having to grapple with challenges or oppressions around their sexuality or their gender, their ability or disability, and all these other intersections of identity. And they all happen in conjunction with or compound with race. And so that's why Ariel and I spearheaded this project of really broadening or expanding the conversation beyond race and recognizing that there are other intersections that we need to consider that are, you know, that complicate this matter. It's really, really highly nuanced. And so that's one of the big things that, I guess, why we built this out, or that's the push to build this anti-oppression toolkit. And I also wanted to add, if it's okay,
Yes.
kind of going back to the earlier conversation, I just wanted to highlight, I talked about earlier the voluntourism industry and, a lot of these youth who are going abroad and not really recognizing or not being conscious of their impact of moving through these places with their privilege. And Ariel was talking about, from the travel writer side or even like destination marketing side, like how we talk about these places. And I just kind of wanted to tie up that loose end, in that I think we came at it from two very different ends. And why this anti-oppression toolkit, or why discussions generally around anti-oppression is so important, is it's kind of like a, I don't know if it's chicken and the egg. Maybe the travel writing or destination marketing side comes first, but these youth only do these things because they're reading, they have the marketing materials coming from these voluntourism industries who are saying, like, go to India or go to the Philippines, which is where I'm originally from, go to these quote unquote poor places that need our help. And that's the language that a lot of travel writers for far too long have been using. And that's, how a lot of travel marketing goes. And so, of course, like, as a young Jasmine who is how old when she first went to India, you're consuming this material. How are you supposed to know any better if everything around you has been telling you this one narrative, this one very narrow stereotype about these places that we're going to? So yeah, I just kind of wanted to do that full circle, or show that, like, tie in that loose end, that we all have a responsibility, of course, as youth, as individual humans, whether you are young or old or whatever age. You have a responsibility, of course, to do your homework, but at the same time, the industries that are leading, that are, have the money, who have all the marketing power, also have a responsibility to present these concepts and to reckon with our own privilege as travelers. So yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
No, thank you for bringing that full circle as well, because I think this is one of those like underlying topics that I think most, I hate to say most mainstream travelers are probably not aware of, but marketing, like terminology and branding, plays a huge role in decision making, especially when it comes to travel. Um, I actually worked as a travel agent at one point in my life. I remember, even oh God, this is awful. Actually, I was like making me feel weird even having to say this out loud. But, I would be talking to people on the phone and emailing them, and I have to also, in my head, like they're giving me a basic like demographic of who they are, obviously, and like where they want to go, and I am basically shaping their travels based on a stereotype. I remember the way that my colleagues even would interact with, not that I had like this. Like my group was amazing. They were very inclusive. They were very diverse, but still, the way that we would interact with people of color or different abilities, or having the fact that we have to have a section of travel that's specifically for people of like for the queer community, for example, or like Black travel. It kind of breaks my heart in thinking that, well, like, do we not all deserve to do things as a community? And I think this is part of like a larger, heavier conversation, of course, which I don't even know if we'll have time to dive into it. But in thinking about all these different layers, how would you define anti-oppression, and what does that work mean for a traveler, so that we can kind of shake the notions of like these things that have just been embedded in us, these systems of oppression that we don't even realize exist, or how to identify them in moving forward on this journey?
So, anti-oppression for me, a very high level definition would be the process of challenging or dismantling the values or the structures or behaviors around systems of oppression. So, whether that's patriarchy or colonialism or white supremacy, it's working to dismantle and to challenge everything that goes into that. Very high level, not a practical definition whatsoever, but I guess that's a something to work from. And I think it looks there are so many ways that that could look like, and something that, to be perfectly honest, I think we're still discovering. This anti-oppression toolkit, we put a disclaimer at the very top of it saying that this is a work in progress. This is something that we will aim to what's the word now, what's the word I'm looking for, to update. The We will work to update this toolkit on a regular basis, because we understand, Ariel and I, Wanderful, we don't have all of the answers. And this is pretty new terrain, these conversations around anti-racism, around anti-oppression, is only making the mainstream right now, like tip of the iceberg. And so we're obviously still learning. And so that's something that we are hoping to, embody, I guess, in our work. And so educating ourselves would be one way to start with dismantling these systems of oppression. Being aware of the fact that these systems of oppression even exist is something that I think not everyone is even aware of. Not people are often not even aware of the fact that sometimes they are being sexist or they are being racist, whether or not that's like externally racist or sexist, but we also have inner work to do in terms of dismantling these systems of oppression. They live inside of us and we have internalized them, and we can be sexist to ourselves and to our own gender, or to our, or racist towards our own people. And so that's one of the first steps, I think, that is like first and foremost, is starting that consciousness or awakening that consciousness. And then from there, oh, gosh, Ariel, jump in at any point here, because then we need to actually take this into action. It's not enough for us to learn or unlearn. I feel like those have been the buzzwords of the year. But at a certain point, like, we need to take our lessons into action, because there, we need to actually see the tangible impact of the things we have learned.
Absolutely, yes. Plus one to everything Justine said. I'm glad that you ended on talking about the act, because I think for me, anti-oppression and anti-racism is an act. It's not a state of being. It is a constant action that we must continue performing. Um, Justine and I learned a lot in putting this together. As she said, we don't have all of the experiences that are outlined here. And so it was really important for us to get that information from folks who are doing that work, which is why, as you'll see if you go to the toolkit for those listening, there are reference links to where a lot of that information came from. A lot of it was adapted and edited by us, and, an amalgamation of many places and many things and definitions that we found. But ultimately, for us, I think the number one um, uh, thing, I guess, that we were trying to keep in mind as we were putting it together is to make sure that we are being accurate and accurately representing and crediting those who have and will continue to do this work. And I think, as we think about what is anti-oppression and what is anti-racism, I think language is obviously super important for a lot of reasons. But I have in my past heard a lot of people refer to themselves as an anti-racist, which I think is great. Like, obviously we should all be anti-racists, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think any one person, you cannot be an anti-racist. You can be anti-racist, but you can't be an anti-racist. That's my personal opinion. I'm sure many people disagree with it, and you are absolutely welcome to disagree with me on it. But I think it's a really important distinction, because I worry that when people start just blanket, referring to themselves as an anti-racist, they think the work is done, and they think that, like, I am this person now. I have this identity, so I don't have to continue educating myself. And I think that's obviously a really dangerous place to be in, because, as I've said and as Justine has said, like, in education is, the most important piece of this whole puzzle. And not just educating yourself, but then, the act that we're talking about is then taking that knowledge and making sure that other people in your life have it as well, and that other people in the world have it as well. Because, obviously you're going to meet people in your life who are not necessarily people you've known before, and who are going to say terrible things. Like, I mean, let's just all be real. We've all been in situations where somebody has said something, not so great in our presence, whether we know them very well or not. And it's like, how do you respond in those moments? And then, not just in those minute, little moments, but how are you showing up in the world? How are you being, not, not everybody needs to be an activist. I mean, I think that we should all be, but, like, how are you furthering the movements? How are you furthering equity and justice for people around the world? I come from a nonprofit background, and I actually am just about to head over to another organization that does work in the criminal justice field. So I'm very into, like, justice these days. But it's real, it's true. It's I think, in order to be good humans, we have to really be thinking about more than just ourselves and how we are. Um, I don't. I don't want to, also say that we should all be saviors for other people in other communities. Nobody should think that they can come in and fix, racism or sexism or transphobia or whatever it is, especially if you are not a part of those communities. But what can you do to support the people who are trying to do that work? That's, I think, the crux of it.
And just to jump on that too, from, specifically for travelers, yeah, you don't have to be an activist in terms of like I feel like we have also a very narrow conception of what an activist looks like or what it is they do. At least for me, when I first started in this world, I was like, oh, I'm not going to go protest every weekend. Like, I can't do that. Or, that's certainly one way to show your activism and a powerful way to do so with your actual body, and showing up in that way. But there are other ways too. And I think, if you're just getting started in this work, as a traveler, even having the consciousness and the awareness of thinking through before you go abroad, where do you come from, how did you get there, and where, when you're going abroad, thinking about the privileges that you carry as you move through these different places, because our presence in another place, it changes the place, like this is a constant, like the Ariel was saying, it's constant, we are constantly changing. And so, yeah, just even having that awareness to see how locals may react to you or treat you differently, I think that is such an important piece to it. And as I'm speaking about this, I'm reading this book right now, and it's called Beyond Guilt Trips. Ariel, I don't know if you've read it yet, by
I
Dr.
haven't, but
Anu.
I love that you're reading it.
Yes. So Dr. Anu was actually one of our speakers at um, Moving Forward.
What's online?
What's online? Okay, we have so many
Oh,
virtual events. I
I
cannot
know
keep
we can't
track.
keep track.
But she talks all about the relationships that we have and the power dynamics that are at play when we're traveling abroad, but also when we're traveling within our home communities and different neighborhoods, and just navigating and negotiating these relationships around race, around different intersections of identity. But I think I'm going on a tangent, so I I will end it there. But yeah, I think just having that consciousness is definitely the first step, and then adjusting your behaviors according to that. And honestly, once you are aware of it, you can't unsee it. And I
Mhm.
do believe that folks who have that awareness in themselves and can see the privileges that they carry, maybe I am optimistic, but I do think that when you do see that, when you do recognize that, people do change their behaviors. You can't not, when you just, I don't know, for me personally, like as my world opens up to all of the injustices of all the inequities that exist in the world, like I can't unsee it and I can't not do anything about it anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to frame activism, Justine. And it's making me think a lot, as the person who a minute ago was like, not everybody can be an activist. I'm like, that's a really good point. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Always learning.
You two are hilarious also. Like, honestly, you guys, you both have these amazing brains with so much, like, just so much to share. Like, I'm also like reflecting heavily as you both are speaking, because you know um Ariel, what you said, like, they think people think the work is done once they've called themselves an anti-racist, or they posted a black square on their Instagram page, like, and it's interesting because, especially, and I'm sure we can relate on this as well, as like being in, in multiracial families. There's sometimes even like these really awkward or uncomfortable situations that can arise because someone is not kind of being empathetic or diving deeper into understanding a certain something, and then making a comment and not realizing how blown out of proportion it can be, just because they didn't take the second to kind of think a little bit deeper into why they thought that thing, or why they had the need to say that. An example would be on the last episode I did with Justine. I'll link to it. I was talking about how I think I talked about how I had to confront a family member on something that was just like the worst on Facebook, and it turned into this like massive thing. And it just makes you think, like, okay, like, it's also, and I like to say sustainability starts at home. And I feel like also work, like anti-oppression work, does start within your home, and understanding, like, you have to look within. And that comes out as well when you're traveling, because I'm sure we've all been in situations where we've been in a destination being conscious of how we might be impacting the locals or the environment, or etc. And it actually comes back the other way, and we become the target. And it's like, oh my gosh, how do I address this when there is so much, there's just so much between you and the individual, whether it's cultural differences, uh, um, spiritual practices, like, and especially I feel like in India that comes up a lot, where I get like targeted with like I was called a Negro by someone who just didn't understand what that word meant. And it was just like their only way they wanted to connect with me around my hair. And, it's interesting how then you have to navigate those situations. And I think that self work and knowing that that work is never done plays a huge role in educating others and being mindful because I think again what you both said before, you can't shame someone, you can't make someone feel like um especially if it comes from a place of just complete oblivion and unawareness. We really have to understand how can we also support that person into getting on the path towards an anti-oppression agenda. So thank you both for your, and we're kind of going over time here, and I want to respect you both. So I just wanted to kind of wind us down by going into what is in the toolkit. What can our audience expect, and what are like the next steps for kind of moving forward after they've gone through everything, and what can they expect kind of for more support from Wonderful in their journey?
So many things. Justine, you unmuted. Go ahead. Okay, you're waving at me, so I will quickly begin. Well, I think Justine gets a little more credit for this than I do. We had many a Zoom call or a Google Hangout call or whatever beforehand to kind of go over the structure of the toolkit, but she was the one who started actually putting it together. So I want to give her major props for that. Um, we start with an index and a glossary of sorry, there's an index at the top that can kind of help take you through all the different pieces, but we first start with a glossary of terms, which is separated out into general terms, terms about ability and disability, terms about racial justice, terms about gender and sex, and then terms about size and body diversity. And then from there, we have a how-to series, which I won't, list out all of the different pieces of that, but it's everything from how to practice allyship with Native and Indigenous communities to how to make your content accessible, to how to write about cultures that are not your own, and then a bunch of outlinking digital additional resources. It's a pretty, I mean, I'm not going to say it's the most comprehensive thing that's ever been created, but I'm very proud of it. And as we've said, we are in the process of continuing to update it. So, for anybody listening, if you feel like there is a glaring, not, I mean, error, yes, absolutely, please let us know. But if there's anything that is like glaringly missing, please, by all means, get in touch with us because we absolutely want to do right by all of the. I mean, there's just so much. There's no possible way we could even in a first iteration, cover everything. And so, um, I
Even within the glossary of terms, Ariel
even
and
with
I were
yeah.
like, how much do we include? Because we wanted to start with that glossary to really build a strong foundation, a shared foundation of what we're talking about, recognizing that, people are coming at this toolkit at very different journeys. Some folks may have already been doing this work for many, many years, but there are others who have never, ever considered this before. And so wanting to be inclusive to that. Go on, Ariel.
Oh, no, please cut me off by all means because I was getting to a point where I was like, "I don't know how to end my thought, so you take me." And now everybody knows, so praise
Now
God.
we're back. So I'll just say, yeah, so we wanted to start with that and we have that how to guide and exactly what Ariel said. If there's anything there that's missing, please do let us know. It's something that we want to update regularly and make sure that any new findings that we have and anything new any new resources we have is included. Again, this is a work in progress. This is an ever changing thing, just like language is an ever evolving thing, just like identity is an ever evolving thing. We want to make sure that we are staying up to date with that and giving accurate information on that. But one thing I'll also say is, if you have gone through this toolkit, and if you have, I am so impressed because I feel like there is quite a lot of resources to go through. But we will be hosting a number of different webinars on various topics to really dive into this, especially in our how-to section. How do we advocate for diverse voices at events, or how do we, as creators, if we're working on a campaign, how do we advocate for a more inclusive campaign if the brand that we're working with does not has not considered that before? How do we that those parts that really require a lot more nuanced conversation. Every relationship with different brands or different creators will look very different. And so that's something that I've been working on in terms of putting those events together. We also have our moving forward third and I want to say final, but this is an ongoing conversation that we're going to have, but at least final for this series that we are hosting that's coming up in early 2021. And so there are still going to be a lot of points of engagement with this toolkit. So I do encourage you to stay in touch with Wanderful and all of our programming, especially Wits Online. Is we always, Ariel's in charge of programming, and because of that, we always have that consciousness and intentionality to bring up these topics in all of our events. And so that's another way for you to get involved and stay engaged with this work.
Absolutely. And we were very proud of the last What's Online we put together, which was entirely about um, uh, I don't know the right word to, but uplifting and supporting and being a part of the movement for marginalized voices within the industry, in a way that hopefully is not, savory, because we had those folks leading those sessions, and it was really wonderful to get to learn from them. And if you so wish, you can become a Wonderful member and get all the recordings to those sessions. And you can go to sheswonderful.com/join to do that. That will be so proud of me right now.
I love it. Yes, and I will include all these links in the show notes, obviously to the toolkit and beyond to learn more about Wanderful. Um, Thank you both for diving into all of this with myself and the audience. And if our listeners want to learn more from you both, because you both do incredible work in this world, where can they find you online?
So you can find me personally across all social media, and my handle is at Justine Abigail.
And I am the same, not the same handle, but across all socials. I am at Ariel Poems, which I outed a couple of weeks ago, but is always fun for me to tell is actually a reference to T.S. Eliot. So I'm
Ah,
very proud of that handle.
beautiful. Oh, well, thank you both so much for your time today. I'm sorry for going over time. I apologize, but there's just so
Clearly,
much to
we
go
had a lot
into.
to say.
Yeah, this is great.
I feel like we'll have to bring you both back to kind of dive into more, because I feel like Wonderful always has a million things going on. For our listeners, I've been part of the Wonderful Network for like I don't even know how long, but it's just such an incredible community, incredible humans, incredible activity and events, and such an amazing place to learn, especially if you are a creator, obviously in the travel space, but even as a traveler looking to connect with more women identifying travelers who are can you can relate to their experiences and dive into all of this heavy shit that needs to be uncovered. The community is so supportive. So I am can be the number one fan on this episode and totally just be like woo woo to Wonderful. So again, thank you both. This has been lovely. Inhale the goodness, exhale the bullshit. Thank you for listening, and thank you for doing the work. Be sure to jump over to curatedconsciously.co for more stories, tips, and inspiration for nurturing your conscious living journey. And be sure to follow along on Instagram at curatedconsciously. Huge shout out to my incredible husband, Profound Sound, for the original dope tracks. Hope you all enjoyed, are feeling a little lighter, and are going into a beautiful and blessed day.